October 22nd, 2025. Ninja Network Building Skills, cohort number 10, module number 4. Make sure you know how to help them. Make sure they know how to help you. Make sure you know how to help them. Make sure they know how to help you. Two sides of the same coin. This really is one conversation, right? One coaching module. And we'll throw some people into breakouts and have you guys work on some of that and see what evolves. But it's my firm opinion based on data. So let me phrase that differently. It's my firm position, i.e., you're welcome to introduce more data, and I may modify that. But if you are referable in someone else's mind, if somebody has said to you, Scott, I'll send leads your way, and they never do, it's probably not because they were a liar. Ponder for a minute the number of times you've said that to somebody and nothing ever came of it either, not because you're a liar, right? But because I think there are three distinct obstacles. Could be one, two, or all three of these, but something's holding them back. It's either they're not exactly sure who, they're not exactly sure how, or they literally just not put the time on the calendar to make it happen. Right? I have a small stack over here of mostly I'm good at real-time execution, right? But I've got a small stack over here of people that I met with over the last 7 days. Introductions, I know exactly who to make and who to make them for. And because I've been sick this week, at the end of the day, I've not stuck around to do catch-up work. I've just walked away from my desk and be like, maybe I'll feel better tomorrow. So it's literally a question of putting the time on my calendar to make those intros, for people that have made them for me, or, they were mutually supportive relationships. And you guys hear me say this all the time. I'll never not say it, because not only do you have to feel comfortable with it, you have to feel comfortable coaching the other person. By the way, here's the interesting part of this. When I say make sure you know how to support them, it's I don't like the word complicated. There's a little more to it than simply waiting for them to tell you who their target market is. Because most people are very bad at this, right? I coach this, and every now and then I'm like, am I even messaging this right? I second guess myself, and I have a coach. It's like, yeah, you need to tighten that up. That was way too long. But then the other day I was in a room, CLA room, Laurie, and I said something, and then I was in a breakout because it was an odd number of people. So I was in the breakout, and odd number of guests. And one of them was like, we're not quite clear on what you're offering. You talked about the result and who you serve. And I said, okay. So we got back in the main room, and I said, I was challenged to be a little clearer. And I was. And two people asked for my calendar like a book. I'm like, okay, then. Right. So even though I coach this, I'm not perfect at it. Right? And I get that. Okay. So you need to be prepared to low-key coach, draw them out on what works for them. And the thing that I say over and over again that we all struggle with, including me, is the notion that you need to be specific. When you say things like anybody and everybody, that ends up producing nobody.
Right.
And the number of examples I could give, not just with referrals, but any number of things. But the human brain tends to prefer concrete images, right? There's the trope of, lying in the meadow on a summer's day, looking up at the clouds and deciding what the clouds look like. And nobody ever says that looks like a cloud. You know what it looks like? It looks like a cloud. They all look like clouds because they're clouds. So they look like clouds. But yet people do what, Laurie? They go, oh, that looks like a lion tamer cracking his whip. I mean, shoot, the ancient Greeks look up at the stars and go, that's a warrior with a shield. That's the Big Dipper. You're like, it's 6 points of light in the sky. How do you get Orion out of that, right? What? You've got to be kidding me, right? But it's human nature to want something specific. Somehow, most of us and the people that we're talking to, have a notion that they should describe their target market with the words anybody or everybody, which has the odd function of producing exactly nobody. And the
Everyone plus anyone equals no one.
Exactly. Number one, it's not a true statement. There is such a thing as bad money, Scott. And the longer you're in your career, that's why I called your name. You've turned away business. In the last year, you've said to somebody, we're not going to do this.
Right.
Am I right? Yeah. You've got a great need. I'm not the one to fill it, right? For whatever the case may be. So it's not true that we'll serve anybody, even everybody that, quote, fills in a couple of criteria, right? So the human brain, so we tend to think that if we are very narrow in what we ask for, we will lose the opportunity to get whatever other leads that person may have thought of. But you have to accept that they will think of nobody. I'd rather get a few leads in a few categories than 0 leads in all the categories, right? Does that make sense? So it absolutely. Go ahead, John. What do you got? You want to chip in?
I've always given the analogy of like duck hunting. People, maybe whether you've ever gone duck hunting or not, from watching cartoons as a kid that your flock of ducks fly over, you have the shotgun that shoots out the pellet, and people think, oh, I just aim up in the air and, lunch falls to the ground. That's not how duck hunting works. You have to pick a specific duck. You have to aim at its head. You have to lead it. You have to follow through depending on how far away, how fast it's flying, blah, blah, blah. And then you shoot that one duck and that one duck falls down. All the rest of the ducks fly away because you shot their friend. Do you care about the ducks that fly away? No, because you have lunch, dinner, whatever it is. And you have to look at asking for referrals that laser specific because if you shoot the shotgun at the whole room, you're going to get no
Yeah.
one. You're not going to, I'm a chiropractor. Anyone with a spine is a good referral. That means nothing. It's so vague.
Right.
It means nothing.
How many of y'all are picturing that video game Duck Hunt now? A little 64-bit. Yeah. I think, sir, you might be a little younger than that one. Um,
And remember, I grew up in like the middle of Papua New Guinea where we did
well,
it.
that's true too. So,
Battling.
right. Age has not as much to do with it as technology does. And the ADHD is kicking in here. You guys familiar in general terms with the Amish communities that exist in the world, right?
Yeah.
And some of them practice a ritual or a season where a young man or woman gets to go out into the English, the American world, and experience it and decide if they want to rejoin the community or not. And somebody posted on Facebook, do they have the opposite of that where I can like try out the Amish lifestyle for a little while? Because I can't, this is getting to be a bit much. And I'm like, oh yeah, I think about that all the time myself. Anyway, ADHD, for those who watch the recording, sorry for the digression, but that's what you get when you work with Daniel Andrew. Okay. So in the structure, right, of making sure that they know how to support you, right? Be clear on your categories. You can have more than one category, but have some fairly specific categories. And it, as an aside, this is, kind of branches out, from that conversation. If the person you're talking to falls in the category of a prospect, unless they were introduced to you on the principle, this guy is a prospect and he knows it, right? He needs what you've got or she needs what you've got, right? But if you discover that they're a prospect, it's never the first category that I mentioned, right? If Sarah said, Dan, who do you serve? And I go, financial advisors, want to talk about it? I'd be like, I serve people where, high trust, high knowledge is important, right? It's usually a B2B, like somebody who's a sales trainer or has a business consulting, right? Maybe a merchant services sort of person. But in some cases, it's business to consumer, like a real estate agent, right? High trust, high knowledge transaction, insurance, financial services is one, right? And then it allows them to go, oh, I might want to have that conversation, right? And you guys have heard me say this in a number of settings. If I may split the genders here and speak very stereotypically, as a guy, if I'm down at the department store, I'm not there to shop or browse. I'm there to buy something. Right? Typically. Almost always. And yet, if the clerk approaches me and says, can I help you? What's the first thing I say? I'm just looking, right? I may look like a prospect. I may sound like a prospect. If you get close enough, I may smell like a prospect. But I'm not a prospect until I say I'm a prospect, right? I'm simply an ideal client profile, but I'm not a prospect yet until I say I am. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay. So I always allow other people to volunteer that they're a prospect, right? And even after I've said just looking, the clerk knows that in 5 minutes, I'm going to be over there going, you got this in my size? Any other colors in the back? Right? And he or she is not going to go, I don't know, Mr. Andrews. I'm not allowed to serve you. You're just looking. Right? Now, yesterday my wife was making dinner and she likes for me to be around, but not in the kitchen because I'm always in the way, right? And we both do that. I'm like, I'll make it. You clean up later. Just so I'm flipping through a menswear catalog. I have no need of menswear, and she's like, "You're not thinking of buying something, are you?" I'm like, "No, I'm just flipping through it to tear out some pages for you to get me for Christmas." And she's like, "Oh, you are not doing that either." And I said, "No, I'm not." And I made a big production when I was done of, see, it's going in the recycle bin. Just was killing time while you were in the kitchen, right? So I will occasionally browse, but I won't go to a store to browse. I'll browse a catalog knowing that I'm just killing time waiting for the Zoom to start or dinner to get ready or whatever the case may be. But if I'm out shopping, I am a prospect, but nobody wants to say they're a prospect until they're ready to say they're a prospect, right? So you want to acknowledge that. And that's kind of a digression from, talking about the categories you serve. Now, I will say that there's two elements of the categories that you serve. I used to use the phrase demographic and psychographic. What do they look like and what's going through their mind, right? My coach uses the phrase ideal client profile and trigger. Either pairing of words, makes sense. You'll hear me use ICP and trigger quite a bit. And I don't mean trigger the way we mean trigger warning, right? But what's happening in this person's life, right? At one level, every business that's open is a prospect for John Salley, right? And yet he doesn't just walk from door to door at the street fair, right, and speak to every vendor. He doesn't go down Main Street or the business district or the shopping center and be like, do you have a need? Do you have a need? Do you have a need?
Well, that's how I started 20
That's
plus
how you
years ago.
started, right? But you're at a point now where you can be a lot pickier about that. So right? What's going on with them that makes them ready to be in a conversation with you? What's the prompt or the nudge, or how do you know that somebody wants to talk to you versus just they take credit cards and therefore they should be talking to me?
That's a question for me.
Yeah. What's the
I
trigger?
mean, it could be them complaining about they can't talk to someone. It could be them complaining about the fees are killing them. It could be complaining about that their terminal doesn't work. Um, it
Yeah.
could be, I got a referral yesterday for a coffee place that they're using Stripe, and Stripe just wasn't giving them the solution that they needed as far as kind of a POS system. And then obviously, you can't call Stripe and say, "Hi, Mr. Stripe, I'd like to talk about the POS options." It's, go to the website, pick column A or column B, and that's it. So there's a lot of it's funny. I was in a call yesterday with it was I met her on your event a couple of months back, Cheryl Texera.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she did a thing about how to make yourself stand out as be the only choice, and I brought that up. I'm like, well, I don't have one selling angle. Not everybody has the same problem. Unless I want to be like the noise and say, "I'll cut your rates. If I can't cut your rates, I'll cut you a check." And to me, on one hand, while that's a good, to get people in the door, so to speak, you're commoditizing yourself because then you're just selling on price. And then if you sell them on price,
You lose them
then
on
the next
price.
person that comes in and says, "Well, 7 minute abs. Okay, I'll give you 6 minute abs. Okay, I got
Right.
5 minute abs."
Right,
You know, I don't want that customer.
right, exactly. Right. So if John's describing, right, what might you hear? Now, in the case of people like if he was connecting with Scott or with Craig, he can coach them to bring that out, right? Meaning, Craig and Scott both are in touch with their clients enough or their prospects to be talking some about operations. And it's pretty easy for them to go, hey, just out of curiosity, right? What's your feeling around your current card processor? And they either go, in which case they need an introduction to John, or they're like, I'm in good shape there, right? Well, if you're ever not, right, I learned that right from hanging out in my own my own town. People are like, I belong to BNI, and rather than go, oh, let me tell you why we're better than BNI, I go, okay, if you ever look around the room and go, there's got to be a better way, that's when you would talk to me, right? Or anybody that's quit BNI because they already decided there's got to be a better way, right?
B&I's making that very easy lately.
Yes, they are. This is not a BNI screed by any stretch, but I'm just saying the modalities.
We all might get called in for depositions if we do start talking about it.
That's it. The modalities, right? Meaning I can tell people what to look for, right? And so, that's part of it, right? In your case, Sarah, it's not just people with money, it's people with money that are going through some transition. They're getting married, they're getting divorced, they've got a new job, they've lost a job, they've started a business, they're selling a business, right? People in transition, that need a new review. Now, and by the way, I think the appropriate trigger is one that is either, quote, visible or can be uncovered easily, right? I was talking with somebody once, and they said, heart-centered leaders is my target market. And I'm like, that's no good. She goes, what? My clients love that phraseology. I said, yeah, you should absolutely use that phraseology when you're talking to a prospect. That makes perfect sense to me. But nobody walks around with a what's the word? A tattoo on their forehead that says, I'm a heart-centered leader. Got solutions for me, right? I was training a corporate lawyer on this a few years ago. And he said, I said, who's your target market? He said, sophisticated legal consumers with sophisticated legal needs. I said, that's great, Aaron. Inside your own head. Or when you're making your annual business plan, right? Or when you're talking to your partners about where the business is going to come from. But how would I know him if I saw him? And he understood him. He goes, oh, that's easy.
That's like describing porn. I can't describe it, but I know what it looks like.
Right. Once I said it, he goes, oh, that's easy. Right. Because nobody's walking around with a tattoo that says, I'm a sophisticated legal consumer. Can you handle, can you help? Right. He said they're in sales and they're adding service, and they're in service and they're adding sales, right? They've got new intellectual property that needs protection, right? They need to figure out, how to protect it and market it, right? He said, and this was during the pandemic. He said they've just discovered that their employees that were given permission to work remotely all moved across state lines and didn't tell them, and now they have to unwind that, because I don't know if you guys understand, but there are some very significant challenges to having people work across state lines. It's not that they can't; it's that your employer has to know that. Right, because there's some cascading effects that follow them, right? And he's like, they're opening a second location, right? Any of that. See, those are all things that I can see or hear or prompt for, right? Somebody will tell you about how they just discovered a third of their employees have left the city and they didn't know it yet. They will tell you, we're growing, we're expanding, we got a new thing in the works, we're adding this, we're subtracting that, but they won't go, I'm a sophisticated legal consumer. I have somebody that can handle my sophisticated legal needs. This is a conversation not going to happen. So when you look for your trigger, right, what are the ways that you could see or hear that? And that's one of the things that you need to share with other people. Here's how you'll know they need to talk to me. They say things like, and when you're trying to get the other person to explain to you who their customer is, because they will usually do a very poor job of it until you low-key coach them, is saying things like, okay, that's what they look like, but how will I know they need you? What will I hear? What will I see in their literature? Right? What will be one of the the things they, complain about as we're, in a breakout room or whatever. Right? What leading questions can I ask them, right, to help support you? I mean, I was talking with a guy earlier today, and I said he's got a community he's starting, a weekly meeting Monday, really around accountability, right? Next actions, right? Talk about wins, losses, what we need to do for the week. And I get it. That's not a bad model. There's plenty of people out there that create paid accountability groups, right? It's price points right where I thought it should be. You and I both know a guy that does this already, John. So John does this, right? About $200 a month. This guy's doing one about $200 a month. I'm like, that's perfect. And I said, so sales accountability, right, is what you're offering. He goes, let's remove the word sales from that. He said, these are just solopreneurs that need action accountability. Right. And I'm like, see, because I stated back to him what I thought I heard, Craig, he was able to help me clarify. Right. Like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. I got it. So that's part of what you're working with, right? How do you message yourself clearly? And by the way, I always believe that we should describe who our prospects are and who our key referral partners are.
Yeah.
I got into a call or your moonshot or something like that. I got on a call yesterday with a guy from Sales Acceleration because I told Darren that people from Sales Acceleration are good for me to meet. I know you know that model, Scott, right? You know, they have a franchise, a B2B franchise. And they have to develop their own business, right? There's no such thing as corporate leads from this org, right? And if they do have them, they go to their top performers, which is the way that it's supposed to go. I don't object to that, right? And I'm talking with him, and I said, you know, where are you at? He goes, well, I just signed up with them in June. I'm like, where are you at in your business? He goes, I don't have client number one yet. And I said, you know, you should really strongly consider Ninja network building skills. And he said, I'm not sure I can afford it. And I said, hey, Jeff, when they put you through sales training, how did they tell you to handle that objection? And when the client says, I can't afford it, he goes, we're supposed to say, well, then that proves you need me. I'm like, okay, just as long as we're on the same page here. Right. But then before I said it, he said, you need to be talking to Sales Acceleration Corporate. All of the people need what you're offering. That was going to be my ask. I'm trying to plant the seed with as many Sales X people as I can that I need to be speaking at their national program. I need to be onboarding. I need to be included in the onboarding, you know, with these people. Right. So it wasn't a key referral partner, but if he hadn't brought it up, I was going to say that. And I said to him, I said, you're new, you haven't closed the deal yet. Do you have the credibility to make that intro? And he goes, actually, I think I do. And I'm like, well, make it happen. And he put himself on my calendar for it's today or tomorrow to actually make that intro for me. Now, whether he wants Sales X to adopt it so quickly that he can go through Ninja and not have to pay for it, I don't know. But I'm going to point out to him, you can't wait on corporate. That's a year-long process. You can't afford to starve for another year. We need to figure out how to make this work for you. But anyway, right? Be clear about what you want. Hamish Knox, one of the top sales franchise performers for Sandler Sales Institute. He and I got in a call about 3 months ago, and he said, you know, what's on your mind? I said, Hamish, we should be referral partners. This is like the third or fourth meeting. And I said, my long-term play is I want to be part of Sandler's, you know, onboarding process. I said, that's probably a multi-step process. Probably need to speak at a national event, you know, get exposure. He says, I can make the speaking happen. No problem. He goes, I'll get you on a call with Christy to make that happen. We just finalized it a couple of days ago. So I'm speaking next month. Yeah, I know, I'm pretty pumped. Right. But you tell them what you need, right? That's bigger than just a prospect, because you never know where you're headed with that. I always think a key referral partner is a good place to be. Now, I also get that somebody's got to be your prospect, right? When you're in business as long as I've been in business, when you're in business as long as Scott's been in business, Craig's almost there, right? You can stop with the key referral partners and simply meet with them about prospects, right? But if that's the case, you're probably not onboarding new get to know you meetings. You're just revisiting your same referral partners over and over, right? At that stage. So, you know, I get that you can't meet people. You know, the one I love, oh, you got to meet Sarah. Why? She's just a lovely person. Y'all would like each other. You know, I firmly believe there's a few billion lovely people on the planet. I ain't got time to be friends with all of them. I need a compelling reason, right? Does she need what I've got? Does I need what she's got? Or are we closely connected enough that a lot of my people need her and a lot of her people need me, right? That's where you got to go. So, I am going to drop you into breakouts here for a couple minutes, right? And let you guys work on what it means to effectively communicate. And by the way, not just kind of go through it, but be prepared for the other person to go, that wasn't as clear as you thought that was. Be prepared to coach each other a little bit, right? And be prepared to receive some coaching in real time, because we're all here to support each other, right? If somebody's like, that's not as smooth as you thought it was, that's to your benefit. I tend to deal with pretty strong egos, i.e. people that are comfortable being right and comfortable being wrong because they want to be right. But I just want to let you know, right, that trying to be nice is not nice. Clear is kind. And if your messaging is vague or it's specific but too much, right, or whatever. So I'd encourage you guys to spend, I mean, we'll probably do 12 minutes in the breakout. Hammer it out. Try on several versions of your elevator pitch, right? The way you introduce each other. When you talk about, you know, what you do, right? What's the result of working with you, who you serve in specific categories. And you can have more than one specific category, but you don't want to be like, everybody. We talked about that. And then the fourth element would be who's a key referral partner or who's a moonshot for you, right? What would be the biggest deal ever? I remember as 9 years old going door to door selling greeting cards, and in my head, there was still a moonshot. Somebody's going to answer the door and be so impressed with the hustle of this 9-year-old, they're going to buy 10 boxes of everything, and I'm going to be able to retire. I remember thinking that at 9 years old, right? So even when I was 9, I had a moonshot. Somebody needs what I've got. Now, if I'd understood corporate gifting the way Gretchen Ott does, right, I'd have been like, hey, does your husband own a business? Great. Let me sell him 10 boxes of everything, right? I could have had some fun with that. And yes, I realized that does your husband own a business it makes some gender-based assumptions, but this was also 50 years ago. So you got to give me some slack. All right. Let me create breakouts here real quick. Steve's not here to do it for me. We're going to create 2 rooms, do a 12-minute countdown. Room 1, I think Sarah and John Salick. And then room 2, then that means, of course, Craig and Scott Calick. And I will open our rooms. And in about 10 minutes, I'll let you know there's a 2-minute wind down. All right. Look for the blue button on your screen. Have some fun with that. Blue button. There we go. No point recording that 12-minute break for all the people that watch it later to be like, oh my gosh, I have no idea when this is coming back. Thanks, John, for that heads up. What'd you learn? 5 out of 5, Craig. That's cool. But what'd you learn?
I forgot exactly what Scott was saying. He's like, you can be very specific on your ask of your ideal client, and it works in a weird way where if he can do this, then he can definitely do this as well.
It is very interesting how they'll bring in the adjacent, categories. It's definitely. I'm like, how come I can't focus? Have glasses for different distances. These are my computer distance glasses. But yeah, it is very interesting, right? They'll be like, but what about? And I don't understand that mental mechanism, but it's definitely a true statement.
Yeah, he was the example he gave. I said medical. He brought back medical folks back. He said he said the thing that will go in their minds is if he can do the administration for a medical office, which is really complex and so forth. Well, he can definitely do it for this contractor. He can do it for the city because
right,
no problem.
Yeah. Large parts of that, yeah. Exactly, and it is the adjacency to that clarity, right? Meaning it's easier for them to go, yeah, but a policeman looks a lot like a fireman, right? In a lot of ways, right? A roofer looks a lot like a gutter guy in a lot of ways, right? A medical office and a legal office look a lot like each other in a lot of ways, but you've got to start from that specificity, right? The place I learned some of this, was going back to my days at Cutco, which I realize, guys, that not everything I learned at Cutco translates to B2B, and I get it. That's cool. But this one does, right? We would get to the end of our presentation. Hey, Craig, just like I said to you over the phone, I get paid just to show it. So what I need you to do is jot down the names of, 10 people or so. It'd be nice enough like you were to take a look. They don't have to be interested in buying, just people nice like you to take a look. I've got to pack up anyway. Here's a pen and a piece of paper. Hand it to them. And they would occasionally say, I don't know anybody, which is fundamentally a ridiculous thing to say because what? What they mean is I can't think of anybody.
Right.
Right. And the best way to keep from being disagreeable is to be agreeable. So rather than go, well, that's just stupid, I would say, that's not a problem.
Even though it's kind of stupid.
But even though it's kind of stupid. And then I would say, who's your best friend? And they'd write that down. Who's your second best friend? I promise not to tell her she's second best. Right. And they'd write that down. And then they would go from there. Right. Once you put something concrete in their head, right, that goes a long way. I firmly believe And this, comes as a byproduct, right, of them thinking of people. And some people can think in real time. The way my brain sorts information, that if I got into a first meeting with you, Craig, I would come up with 8 or 10 names that I think could be good for you. Right. But I still want to get back into that second call, because number one, even if all 8 are great for you, might not want me to dump all 8 onto your calendar at once, right? You might need to spread that out.
Yeah.
And number one, and number two, I could be wrong about all 8 being good for you, right? So I want to get back into a kind of a nominative process, which is, what we'll talk about at length in, module 6. But just because somebody's thought of some names, I have some people to introduce you to. Great, let's schedule a time to talk about that, right? And the analogy is, even with Cutco, if I got 10 or more names from somebody, I would double back while I'm still sitting there talking to them and say, if you had my job, who would you call on first? Who would you call on second? Who would you call on third? And I would star those 3. Because the reality is, in the world of Cutco, once your calendar's full, you don't need 10 names. You need 3 for every one appointment, because one would say, yes, come over. One would say, no, don't come over. One would say, call me later, which is code for don't come over.
Right.
Right. But if I had 20 a week going on, I only needed an average of 1-to-1 to keep the 20 going. Right. So even though I had just gotten 10 names, I would double back and go, if you had my job, who'd you call them first? Who'd you call them? Who'd you call them third? Now, in that case, I'm letting them kind of coach me on who to call them. But by the way, here's the interesting point. They were usually not numbers 1, 2, and 3 on the list, right? You need to get the 10 and then ask for the best 3. Because if you ask for the best 3, you're not going to get the best 3. You're going to get the first 3. But if you get the 10, then you can ask for the best 3. So if they've thought of some people, I want to get back into a nominative process where they're going to describe who and why they want to introduce me. And I'll go, you're on target for Scott, but Sarah, not so much. Right? Either I'm going to make Sarah low priority or maybe never. But that's helpful because number one, now I don't have to meet with both Scott and Sarah. And I know you know better than to take this personally, Sarah. Right. Right. I don't have to meet with Scott and Sarah. But number two, I'm reframing Craig's understanding of who's good for me. Right. Meaning the next time we do a list together, it's going to be a little more condensed. So, but the whole idea, right, of that once you get them rolling with a thought or two, they will go other places with it. Is very interesting.
Yeah.
In that regard. So you definitely want to, and then you need to be prepared to kind of pull that out of them. Here's one of the things that I think is absolutely interesting. We understand how to communicate who we are and what we do. We have to be reminded to stay on track because you get bored with the words come out of your own mouth. Rousing, it's the first time they've heard it, right? You got to remember, yep, I'll settle for being bored with what I say because I'll say the same thing every time. And it's easy to go, well, if they don't really know how to describe it, that's not on me. Well, yes and no, right? And my point there, Sarah, is that you're looking for a mutual relationship. Meaning if they can't describe to you who they serve well, and you settle for that, and therefore you can't serve them because you don't know exactly who or how,
right,
then the relationship's going to die because you're not in a position to be in service to each other. So I think the fact that you do have coaching creates a little bit of space for you to carry some degree of notional, obligation. I use the word, in a very low key way, meaning you still get to choose who you want to build with. Right. But if I have an interest in building a mutually beneficial relationship and I have to prep them a little bit in order to serve me or for me to serve them so that we can have a mutually beneficial relationship, I'm prepared to take that on. Right. The way I used to phrase this was, be prepared to coach them on how to serve you. Be prepared to coach them on how to coach you on how to serve them. That made perfect sense to me. But after the 6th time I said that, my wife was like, what now? And I'm like, okay, let's not assume everybody gets it, but make sure you're clear, make sure they're clear, right? Is the summary of that. Because number one, you are looking to build a mutually beneficial relationship. Number two, and this is oddly true, meaning I can't identify the exact psychological mechanism, But the fact that you know what you're doing and you can help them know what they're doing creates credibility for you across the whole spectrum. They assume if you're good at coaching me on how to do this better, you're also good at whatever else it is that you do, right? That degree of confidence. And if they get to choose between lunch with somebody that's not very helpful, right? Although it feels good and it promises to be helpful, and lunch with somebody that actually actively is helpful, they're usually going to go with the person, where they feel like they come away with, the value, on a consistent basis. And so I think it's important to ask, right? And it is also worth noting that, what was the references I made? Oh, if you're meeting with somebody for a second or third time, even if it's just been a couple of months, I always ask them to recap, right? I got on a call today. I think the first time I met with this guy was 3 weeks ago. And we got on a short call. And I said, I feel bad. I said, I can't lay hands on my notes for you, which is super weird to me because I almost always can, but I don't know where they are. I probably filed them under today once I saw him get on my calendar. And that's the one place I didn't look. I just thought of it just now. And he said, that's okay. Because he said, it wouldn't matter anyway. I've changed my model since we spoke 3 weeks ago. I'm like, oh, okay then. Right. But if I hadn't prompted him for the fact that I was going to need to recap, I might have spent time trying to think of leads for him that weren't who he was looking for. And that may be why he put himself back on my calendar for a short call to update me on that. But he also wanted to thank me for an intro I made on his behalf as well, which is kind of cool. To a resource. He's like, oh, I joined that community. That's amazing. I'm like, yay. That's good to hear. Good stuff there. All right. What else can we work on that's going to be in service to you guys right through here? I think part of, making sure they're able to support you, right, is sometimes you do have to kind of drag out of them. They're usually pretty decent at identifying key, ICPs, ideal client profiles, prospect profiles, if you, ask them to clarify. Some people struggle with identifying a key referral partner. I've met people that are very successful in business working for a multi-million-dollar company. And when I said key referral partner, she's like, oh, what now? And I'm like, we should be talking. And she emailed me a few days later. She goes, I actually ran that concept by my boss. He'd never heard of it either. I'm like, oh, there's a corporate gig for me right there. I'm like, man, and you guys are already doing pretty well. How much can we do if we master this, right? But there are a lot of people out there that either don't understand key referral partner in general terms or don't know who those people are. So that goes back to what we said in stage 2, module 2, which was be strategic about who you build with. The same way you kind of built your understanding of who your key referral partners are, it's important to possibly ask them those same questions, right? When they say, right, this is who I serve, right? Who comes before you and who comes after you? Now, Monica Bazanov, who most of you know, because she shows up in certain places that I exist in, right? She says, what problem do you create? And that's good languaging for her. That makes sense in her world. I think people have a problem with the word problem, ironically. And she was talking with somebody recently, and I'll just use the first name, Bethany. And she's like, she was trying to lead her to understanding that I'm a good key referral partner for Bethany. And Bethany knows me, but she doesn't know me that well. Okay. So Monica's like, what problem do you create? And Bethany's like, oh, I'm a life coach. When I'm done with them, they don't have any problems. And she's like, but what problem do you create? She's like, nothing. They're, when they're done with me, we're done, right? They're perfect. They don't need any help anymore ever again. And Monica's like, where do you leave off? When they're done with you, what do they ask you for next? And she said, now they've got their head on straight. They want to know about growing their business. And Monica's like, that's what I want to talk to you about. Where do you send them? Marketing, SEO agencies, right? Podcast platforms. She goes, well, that's a lot of time and money. How about a referral relationship, that they can use? She's like, oh. And Monica's like, you should talk to Daniel Andrews. Bethany's like, I know Daniel Andrews. Monica's like, I know. That's who introduced me to you, right? But you don't know enough about him, right? You need to loop back there. And we had a great call yesterday, about how she can send people to me when they're done, right? So the phrase, what problem you to create, might land wrong on people, but when they're done with you, what else do they need, or what do they need next is a good way to phrase it, right? When they're done with you, what do they need next, or what else do they need?
Yeah.
Right? In Craig's case, right, once he's solved the problem for their business and got them getting more done with less expense, a vacation planner might be a great next step, right? How about you, Scott? When they're done with you, what is it they ask for next?
Um, it's a good question. Probably time management.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Because if they've got more business coming in, they need some structures and support around, how do we get all this done? Right. I mean, I remember, I hired a coach, and then, to help me about, well, I have to do the math. It was 2020, right? And he moved my income up so much, I needed a CPA to help me come up with a different corporate structure. I was just running around with, plain old, solopreneur, what is it? Self-employed, right? Everything passed through, every dime of profit passed through as income, right? I'm paying huge amounts of taxes. And I went to my CPA. She's like, you can keep that in your bank account and pay it out to yourself as salary over time, and then you're not paying taxes. I'm like, oh, I didn't know. Right. So, if you help somebody solve a problem, that creates, you might say, another problem, or I would phrase it, who do they ask for next? Right. Where they headed, when they're done with you, where they headed. And then the other part, and so when you're trying to get the other person to identify their key referral partner, you can ask them that. When they're done with you, where are they headed next? Right. And the reverse of that is, right, have you ever talked with somebody that you thought was a prospect, but you realized they weren't ready for you yet? They needed something else first. And where did you send them? Because that answers the question, right, of where can my business come from? Right. The CPA in my world, Holly Kyle, sends people to bookkeepers frequently, because if you walk into Holly's office with a literal or figurative shoebox of receipts, and she's had the literal happen as lately as 2024, right, with the shoebox of receipts, she's a CPA. She ain't doing that. She'll send you to a bookkeeper first and say, when you got your numbers, come back to me. Right. I don't want to see anything other than totals. Totals and categories. Right. So you prompt people to ask them that question as well. Cool. Thanks, Greg. Good do you think, man? So I think that's right, an awareness of how do you prompt the other person to clarify. Because to the degree that you can help them be clear, that opens up their opportunities for you to help them, just like your willingness and ability to be clear opens up their opportunities to help you. I'm not going to keep you guys hanging out for, just to repeat the same stuff over and over. I'm just thinking in my head, is there anything else that I feel like I need to cover with regards to learning how to support them, making sure they know how to support you? I do firmly believe that your quest should always be for mutuality, not reciprocity. There's a subtle distinction in those words, right? Reciprocity doesn't work well. It's a dead end street. It feels transactional, right? But mutuality goes a very, very, very different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think in the context of that, and it goes back to setting the expectation around meetings, in general, right? When you launch one. But I mean, I spoke to a friend of mine, Robert, and he said, "Oh, I understand what you're saying, Dan." He said, I like to show up at, a first meeting with somebody with no expectations, no agenda. And I said, "That sounds lovely, Robert. That's a terrible idea." He goes, "What?" I said, "Who wants to take a meeting with no agenda?"
Right.
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 Right. How many times would Sarah's husband have to see me on the calendar, for a Zoom call and go, "What's that about?" And she goes, "I don't know. We just keep meeting, but there's no agenda," before he bothers to lean in the screen and be like, "Hey, Dan, just want you to know I exist." Right. "Oh, I get it. I knew she's married. Right. I'm married too." He goes, "What the hell?" Right. It was, now I use a gendered reference. Of course, these days could be a guy meeting a guy or a woman meeting a woman. Right. Who even knows? But, nobody wants a meeting with no agenda, and their partners don't want a meeting with no agenda. Right.
Right.
but I said, but I am willing to show up with a willingness to give more than I receive in that moment. Because if I put 20 to 25 minutes on the calendar, that time's shot anyway, right? So it may be the case that I give more to you than you give to me in that moment. It may be the case that you give more to me than I give to you in that moment or ever. But because I showed up with that mutuality, I'm comfortable with the idea that it could flow either way in that moment or even over time, because I know my heart's in the right place. So I think that's the key difference, right? We are searching for mutuality. All right. I'll stop there. If you guys don't have anything else you want to add or subtract, we will stop the recording, stop the meeting, and
Okay.
see you guys in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
I'll be doing it from
See you,
Banff,
sir.
Canada, so it should be an interesting background.
All right.